I have to say my spine tingled when Mr. Naimi was replaced, because suddenly I was replaying Sheikh Yamani after 25 years being dispensed with as the oil minister back in the 70s. And I just wondered, are we then going to see a redux of what we saw through the 80s, where ultimately the crude price fell to $10 a barrel?
Yeah. So the 80s were, a very interesting time for the industry. If you think about what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years, we have, just in West Texas alone, I think we are on track over the next 10 years to find reserves equivalent of the order of magnitude of Saudi Arabia. When you have that kind of technological change and you have that speed at which it's implemented, companies focus on growth, and that's what's been happening. You've seen a mega trend in M&A in the last 5 years. You've seen a substantial amount of growth, and it's really difficult for companies to focus on both growth and efficiency at the same time.
Private equity's now gotten involved, though, in the US. You've seen a lot of ownership change where they might have been involved on the debt side, now they're on the equity side. Does that alter the profile of growth for the US shale companies?
I think it alters a couple of things. Growth is probably one of them, but more importantly, efficiency. The next 5 years have to be about cost of capital. Regardless of what you think of OPEC, they've been very effective at repricing the global cost of capital. So access to debt and equity has been very challenged in the US. 1 out of every 2 energy bonds trades at distress levels. We haven't seen anything like that for over 30 years. So if you think about the next 5 years in an environment with, let's say, volatile and moderately increasing oil prices, the focus is on efficiency. In the 1980s, the unit production cost in real dollars declined by 50% over the so-called lost decade. Unit finding and development costs decreased quite meaningfully as well. And despite what was ultimately a very tepid oil price environment, if you bought a basket of high-quality oil and gas equities at the start of the decade and put $100 in, by the end you would have had something north of 300. So in the private equity business, what we're focused on is identifying companies that you can actually find ways to improve operations and take a good asset base and grow it through the dislocation.
Okay.
Well, I think it's a very important structural problematic, the energy complex for banks, because they have exposure to this sector, and especially for the US banks and the Canadian banks. For us, when analyzing these banks, is to try to understand if they are adequately reserved for potential losses that could continue to arise as the price stays low. So for us, it's really trying to understand, and it's interesting to hear what you have to say here about where we're going to be in 5 years' time, and how the industry is going to manage with a low oil price.
Yeah. One of the things I'd say that's caught a lot of people off guard has been the overlay of bank regulation in the United States for a lot of these oil and gas companies, and that's really cut off their lifeblood on these so-called reserve-based lending facilities.